So I've been looking at this copy. So this is my copy of the Three Jewels, actually signed by Sangharakshita. I don't know when I got him to do that, actually. And I looked at the preface, at least the third edition by then. And it signed Sangharakshita, the Hampstead Buddhist Vihara, London, which means that the first edition happened while he was living in a Buddhist Vihara. It's before Triana, before all of that was set up, before he even thought he was going to be setting up his own Buddhist movement. So this text, this series, belongs to a particular time in his life where he's not involved at all with a Buddhist movement or trying to set something up. He's just talking about what the Dharma is and what a life steeped in the Dharma needs to look like. So I think that's what makes it even more essentialized here. Yeah. Later, when he starts setting up FWM and Triratna, he's talking more about how to live it and how to be engaged with each other. There's more sort of the path of transformation, if you like. They're more kind of almost utilitarian side to it as well. Yeah, but here it's just a raw material, and that's where you find that kind of the fire in him and poetry. And it just reminds me actually of when I was interviewing him once, when he was still alive, and we were talking about Ambedkar, and he said this line. He said something like, Ambedkar was the man with the vision, and that's what people needed. And I sometimes think that to myself, you need somebody with the vision in order to help you understand what you need to do to follow that. And I think this is him as a man of vision. That's where he's speaking from.
When I did a 4-month retreat at Guhyaloka, in the course of the retreat, ordination training retreat, but there was a period in the middle where we were looking in depth at the Three Jewels. And in the study, we were trying to understand, particularly the passage that I remember was the implications of the Lakshanas, and just getting it clear in our minds, getting it clear conceptually, what the Lakshanas were pointing at in experience. And then in the shrine room, we're sitting and we're just looking at the impermanence of experience. And this beautiful dialogue going on between the study support, the meditation. You sit in meditation, your experience goes a bit deeper, and the next time you study, you're starting to see implications in it that you just didn't see before.
It's so interesting because you've got quite a different take on that text, although I sort of relate to your confidence in it, actually, which is what's coming through. That kind of like this text, you could circle around this text and it can take you quite far. And you're doing it in a 3 or 4 month retreat, yeah. But I remember I was cooking on an order convention in 1985, and pretty much the whole of the women's order was gathered in this convention. I was a mitra who was just on the cooking team. I think there were 32 order members on it. And they were studying with Sangharakshita the chapter on the human situation. And there was a line from it that they used to come out and have sit around at lunch and talk about it. But there was a line that stood out for me, which is a bit different from what you're talking about. Let me see if I can find it, because I've made some notes. Oh, here we go. Energy is primary, form secondary. It is not that man wills, but rather will man's. And that's such a profound reflection. I mean, I've remembered it ever since, and that's quite, I've always known exactly where it was on the page and everything like that. And it's sort of something that can just turn your mind over into something different. It creates waves in your psyche, I think. What does it mean that it's my will that forms me rather than I'm a person that's got will? And in a way, it sort of travels on the same lines that you're talking about, yeah? It's a sort of seeing through of a certain belief or view we have of who we are, and takes us right down to a slightly less sort of unformed sort of territory. Interesting.
And it's nice that you're bringing out that poetic element. I probably kind of respond to the more analytical. It's got a beautiful analytical shape to it. But yeah, he's fervent, isn't he? You can really feel that.
A lot of it, as you're talking, the analytical language he's using is often it's backed up with metaphor. He's using metaphor a lot throughout.
Yeah.
I mean, I said to you earlier, this book, I love this book more than The Survey, the Sangharakshita's other big book that he wrote around that time, and or a bit earlier. And you said it's so accessible, and the language is very accessible, and the chapters are quite short, and they're instructive. They're really guiding you to a place, and it's metaphor, analysis, metaphysics. It's very interesting.
I'm just remembering a whole set of ideas that are so vivid in the text. So that the famous one where he talks about the relationship between anicca and anatta, so impermanence and insubstantiality. And he uses the image of a leaf. And he says in language, you've got a leaf, and the leaf starts off as green, and then it goes sort of red, then it goes brown. So you've got a leaf that changes. So he says, in a sense, that's anicca, that's impermanence. But then he says, if you look more deeply, there's no thing apart from the qualities that change. So see if I can remember roughly how he says it. But if you look at anicca, you've got this idea that things change. And then he says, if you reflect more deeply, you sort of realise that things, in inverted commas, are change. But that image of a leaf, and there'd be no leaf apart from the dynamic, unfolding qualities of the leaf. It's such a simple, vivid way into understanding what anatta's getting at. And in a way, sort of, again, it picks up, it comes from a different angle on what you're saying about it not being man that wills, but will that mans. You're looking at this dynamic process that we draw conceptual boundaries around. It's
interesting. It's really interesting you brought up that area, because I was on a retreat earlier this year, and we got into the whole area of insight inquiry and looking a bit at anatta, and somebody said, what is the difference between impermanence and insubstantiality? And I was able to quote exactly I wrote it down actually earlier in a few words, but in slightly different words than he's using, but I'll see if I can find it, because here we go. The difference between the truth of impermanence and the truth of insubstantiality can also be expressed by saying that whereas according to impermanence the condition changes, according to insubstantiality it is change, which is exactly what you're saying. And it's, again, it's poetic. I find that poetic. I know it's analytical as well.
But there's a kind of sequence in the chapters, and that flavour that you're bringing out a bit, you get really clearly in the sort of shape of the book. Like, going back to my retreat, one of the things that struck me is that you've got this sort of language in Buddhism about letting go, relinquishment, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and it sounds in its language quite negative. But actually what it's pointing to experientially is intensely positive. And in the sequence that the book goes through, it starts off with, it evokes the Buddha, doesn't it? The first sections and the nature of enlightenment. So you've got this very positive first step. And then the Dharma section, which is the section probably that I know best, the sequence looks at the nature of existence. So you're sort of looking at those qualities of impermanence and substantiality. But then it sort of goes from there to a chapter on the human situation. And again, there's more than this, but what I remember from the human situation is this description of that dynamic unfolding process of impermanence in our own experience. And in particular, a kind of framework that Bhante uses a lot is the positive nidanas. So it sort of starts off with the the Shraddha, that sort of intuition is something. The first explosion of energy when you see what's possible in piti. You get the prashrabdi of the calming down. You get the emergence of sukha and the kind of intense coming together of your energies that leads on to samadhi, and then the samadhi into the knowledge and vision of things as they are. And it sounds like, like another abstract analytical framework. But I think actually what, again, the text is pointing at, what that teaching's pointing at, is an observable unfolding process in our own minds. And one of the things I love about that sequence, you were talking about insight inquiry, which one of my concerns about that emphasis on insight on its own is it kind of decontextualizes it from a broader practice framework like ethics, like samatha practice. And what you get in the nidanas is the insight, the knowledge and vision of things as they are, grows organically out of the energies of the mind coming together, the distractions falling away, and an intensely psychologically whole, emotionally positive, emotionally integrated opening up to the nature of things. So to put insight, or to put vision in that traditional context of the unfolding process of the nidanas, when you finally get to seeing the nature of existence, it's a grounded, integrated, embodied, emotionally positive, whole seeing. And it gets described in the book, and following from that, you get the goal, and the goal's an evocation of the qualities of enlightenment, and in particular, again, maybe going back to this idea that it's something dynamic, another take on it's will that mans rather than man that wills, as the arising of the bodhicitta. So that will to enlightenment, when that energy isn't limited anymore by self-grasping. So it's just this beautiful description of an intensely positive unfolding process that grows directly out of seeing that the nature of things is impermanent. Beautiful sequence.
Yeah, and I love your emphasis on natural. It just makes me think, once when I visited Sangharakshita, he said to me, Saddhanandi, humans grow as plants grow, much more than we realise. And it is that sense that, just very simply like nourishment, sunlight, all the things that he describes, like my White Lotus, citrus, and else, where a human being unfolds in a natural way. Yeah. And I mean, you went through art school like I did, but I've often thought the processes I sometimes went through in a piece of art would mirror an unfolding, a natural unfolding through different stages, which could sometimes see in the spiritual life. Kind of unfolding of creativity and innovation and sort of standing more on original marks, on original thoughts or something, freer from ideas about what it should look like or something. And I think that gave me a lot of confidence, I think, in what we were doing, that somehow I'd sort of recognised it somewhere else.
There's a great Picasso line, since we're talking about art, but Picasso says you should have an idea of what you're trying to do, but it should be a vague idea. Right? And I think you kind of get that in the Dharma. Like I think right view that what you've got in the tradition is you're trying as clearly as you can to articulate what that experience is like. And the articulation is helpful, but you have to hang quite loose to it as there is a support for something, but it's deeper and freer and less contained than the ideas are. But I think what the tradition's saying is that the easiest route to that open, immediate experience is to move out of our confusion, to move into something that's clearer. So with the nidanas, you're just having your attention brought to something that's almost intrinsic to how the mind works. You know, you take awareness into your experience and it starts to calm down. You're connected to yourself and it feels good to be connected to yourself. So that process it's got a predictable shape to it, but it's just there as sort of, well, the old metaphor again about fingers pointing at moons, isn't it?
But I find it, I'm struck by the language you draw on, like when you say, or, you know, when you begin to focus on the breath or whatever, you calm down. And I think, oh, I see that process so in such a kind of alchemical way, more like when you turn your when you bring awareness to your experience, it's like alchemical. You have no idea what that's going to kind of release or unfold. Which feels a bit different. But I think maybe I do need to calm down a bit more sometimes. It'd be good to sort of think more like that. Yeah.
I kind of like having the map. Every time I get anxious about what's going to unfold, I can just check the nidanas and make sure it's going to be okay.
But actually, the way that it unfolds for each individual person is going to look so different as well. You know, everyone's. I mean, it's so interesting. It's like individuality. You know, an individual grows and develops and becomes more individual. And as Sangharakshita says, they become more and more the same in a universal way. It's so, and that's absolutely true. Like, I suppose you're based more on ultimate kind of values or ultimate truths rather than just your own little neuroses.
And shared experience, isn't it? Whatever shape it takes, it's going to be more aware than the confusion that we started with, and it's going to be kinder. You know, like it's an emotional connecting to yourself and connecting to other. So that there are qualities to it that are recognisable. You'd see in any practice unfolding. But the shape that it takes, you know, me going for the analytical structures and you going for the poetic, for example.
Yeah, that's true. And all that unfolding that you're describing is recognisable from the outside. I've been very struck once catching a train from Birmingham to London, and I had a little brief conversation with somebody, hardly anything, because I needed to know if that train was going to London or not. So that's the level of conversation we were having. And at the end, when we both got off at London, she asked me who I was and what I was doing, and I said I lived in a Buddhist retreat centre. And she said, you know, I knew immediately there was something different about me. And I thought, it's because somehow it's almost like we're not doing what normal people do anymore. And it's very tiny differences. We're not doing the anxiety, or we're not doing the kind of, I don't know, embarrassment about having to speak to a stranger. There's something we're not doing that gets noticeable, but there's something we are doing that gets noticeable as well.
The book was written in early 1960s, 66, maybe 65. And so in a sense it's like 50, 60 years old.
Yeah.
But the shape that it's describing, that move from attending to the nature of existence to looking at how that unfolds in our own experience, to looking at the flowering of it in the nature of enlightenment and the arising of the bodhicitta. You've got a description, like the nature of existence gives you a clue. You're looking at something that's trying to take awareness to the fundamental nature of things and then to draw out the practice implications of that. And I think what you've got in the Three Jewels is as clear a summary of the ground that Buddhist practice is trying to cover. I love that little line that you quoted about Dharma practice being the sort of shortest distance between our experience now and the experience of enlightenment. But I think you get that really essentialised in the three jewels, the sort of move from the Lakshanas to the Nidanas to the Bodhicitta, you're looking at absolutely fundamental shape of practice. So I think to be looking at it, you're looking at as succinct and as clear a description of both in a way sort of the practice of the Dharma, but certainly Triratna's approach to the practice of the Dharma. So it's just such a formative text. A lot of what happened later in Triratna, a lot of what unfolded in Sangharakshita's teaching over the next sort of 30, 40, 50 years is anticipated, and even in a way you could see that the later teaching of a drawing out of the implications of a shape that's already there in the three jewels.
It is a text written by Sangharakshita, yes, and there's something about it that sounds like it's an early text, if you see what I mean. Maybe it's an early text for us, but there is something that's very pithy and essentialized, as you say, which gives it a flavour of a kind of early Buddhist text that's just very, very evocative. Yeah.
And that and the seminars on it, so it's Sangharakshita, I guess, in the 70s, maybe early 80s, commenting on a text that he wrote in the 60s. But reading the seminars, it's Sangharakshita at his most on fire, most inspired, most creative. I think the seminars are thrilling.
I think that's true, and I think the reason is the content of the book is absolutely of the nature of the spiritual life. It's not really about lifestyle or anything like that. It's based in pure Dharma. It's a vision, actually. It's not really touching very much on the path of transformation at all. It's mostly about the path of vision. So in a sense, then for him to lead study through that, it's going to be just as you described, like he's on fire. Because in a way, he can build on his own kind of, it's a vision, but it's a Buddhist vision. It's not just Sangharakshita's vision. And it's an easy thing for him to stack up from.
Sangharakshita is this, like one of the ways he's described spiritual life is in terms of going for refuge to the three jewels. And I think the exploration of the three jewels in this book gives you a sense of why that's as central as it is, what it is exactly we're moving towards.
There's a lovely little kind of aphorism or quote from the Threefold Refuge seminar, where he says something, and this was hard to practice for me earlier on. He says, you start with the connection with the three jewels, and they're like bright and shiny and out there, and you're moving towards them. But eventually, as you begin to embody them and place them more in your own experience, they become the three refuges. And I just love it as a sort of, as a description of the relationship between those two, well, again, metaphors, but also of the journey, I suppose. Just in those few lines, it's a journey. How does one turn the three jewels into a refuge?
Yeah, lovely.
It's different words, and in a way, only an individual person really understands what those words are going to mean for them externally and then internally.